The UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is a universal convention of principles that recognizes the existence of climate change due to human activity and attributes the main responsibility to fight against this phenomena to industrialized countries. It was adopted in New York on May 9, 1992 and opened for signature on June 4, 1992 at the Rio Summit that year. It entered into force on March 21, 1994. The Framework Convention allows, among other things, to strengthen public awareness on a global scale of problems related to climate change. As a supreme body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the COP, or the Conference of the Parties, was created, which means that the COP is the highest authority on climate matters with decision-making capacity. Namaskar, hello and a very warm welcome viewers. You're watching this special presentation of Sansad TV on the Conference of the Parties, or COP. It is the apex decision-making body of the United Nations Climate Change Framework Convention. The COP is the most important global climate summit held since 1995, every year in a different country. The COP is made up of 196 countries plus the European Union, called the Parties. In this edition, you'll get to know everything you wanted to know about the COP. So come along. States that are parties to the convention are represented at the COP, at which they review the implementation of the convention and any other legal instruments that the COP adopts and takes decisions necessary to promote the effective implementation of the convention, including institutional and administrative arrangements. The COP was created to adopt necessary decisions to achieve the objectives to fight climate change, such as the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere in order to prevent risks to the Earth's climate change. Environmental experts, ministers, heads of states, non-governmental organizations, and in some meetings, civil society and the private sector participate in the annual meetings. In recent years, emphasis has been placed on the participation of young people, creating a space and events for them. In view of the rapid advance of the global warming and climate change, it was thought that an annual climate conference should be held to advance more effectively in the fight against climate change.
Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
Although it is true that the world in a quarter of a century has improved its vision on issues such as global warming, climate change, wind energy, solar energy, green hydrogen, green cities and electric cars, there is still much to be done. Global climate change is not a future problem. Changes to Earth's climate, driven by increased human emissions of heat-trapping greenhouse gases, are already having widespread effects on the environment. Glaciers and ice sheets are shrinking. River and lake ice is breaking up earlier. Plant and animal geographic ranges are shifting, and plants and trees are blooming sooner. Effects that scientists had long predicted would result from global climate change are now occurring, such as sea ice loss, accelerated sea level rise, longer or more intense heat waves. Some changes such as droughts, wildfires and extreme rainfall are happening faster than scientists previously assessed. The severity of effects caused by the climate change will depend on the path of future activities. More greenhouse gas emissions will lead to more climate extremes and widespread damaging effects across our planet. However, those future effects depend on the total amount of carbon dioxide we emit.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
The Conference of the Parties was born with the premise of strengthening public awareness on a global scale about the problems related to climate change. Let's take a quick look at some of the biggest moments from previous COPs. Since its inaugural conference in Berlin in 1995, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of the Parties has established a global forum for political leaders to tackle climate crisis. COP has united almost every country on Earth under a single issue and an unprecedented diplomatic feat in global politics. COP 1, Berlin in 1995. The very first summit saw major countries and world leaders officially agree to meet every year to discuss climate change and limit emissions. It was the starting point. COP 3 in Kyoto in 1997. This meeting saw the adoption of Kyoto Protocol, which promises to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases in industrialized countries. In addition, it established the foundation of the carbon market. COP 13 in Bali in 2007. The Kyoto Protocol was to be replaced by the Bali Roadmap, which included all countries and not just developing industrialized ones. COP 15 in Copenhagen in 2009. Keeping global temperature increases below 2 degrees becomes official. Richer nations also pledged to finance developing countries' long-term goals. COP 16 in Cancun 2010. The Cancun Agreements formalized previous commitments set out in Copenhagen. The Green Climate Fund was also created. COP 17 in Durban in 2011. All countries agreed to start reducing emissions. This included US, Brazil, China, India, and South Africa. A global agreement that comes into force in 2020 was also introduced. COP 18 in Doha in 2012. The Kyoto Protocol is extended until 2020. This was not supported by the US, China, Russia, and Canada. COP 20 in Lima in 2014. All countries agreed to develop and share their commitment to reducing emissions of greenhouse gases for the first time. COP 21 in Paris 2015. The Paris Agreement adopted by all to keep global warming below 2 degrees and continue to limit overall temperatures to 1.5 degrees. COP 22 Marrakesh in 2016. 3 documents came from this year's COP as the Paris Agreement came into force. First was the Marrakesh Action Proclamation, a political supporting of the Paris Agreement. Second was the Marrakesh Partnership to strengthen climate collaboration leading up to 2020. And third was the first meeting of the CMA, a new decision body of the Paris Agreement. COP23, Bonn, 2017. Progress was made on how the Paris Agreement will work in practice. A new process allowing countries to share experiences and good practices called the Talanoa Dialogue was created. A gender action plan was also brought in to ensure women were involved in decisions relating to climate change solutions. The Paris Agreement has so far been the most significant outcome of COP negotiations since it is near universal, as 197 parties have signed the pact. Countries came up with nationally determined contributions that they would have to achieve by 2030. These NDCs are reviewed and revised every 5 years as per the agreement. China, the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, pledged to peak emissions before 2030, reduce carbon intensity by 65% below 2005 levels, increased installed capacity of wind and solar energy by 1200 gigawatts, and increased forest stock by 6 million cubic meters. India, the third largest emitter, made 3 promises: to reduce emissions intensity economy-wide by 33 to 35% below 2005 levels, to generate 40% of electricity from renewable energy sources and to create a carbon sink capable of absorbing 2.5 to 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide through additional forests and tree cover.
We believe that an ounce of practice is worth more than a ton of preaching. हम भारत में के फ्यूल मिक्स में नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल की हिस्सेदारी बढ़ा रहे हैं। हम 2022 तक रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में अपनी कैपेसिटी को 175 गीगावाट तक ले जा रहे हैं और आगे हम इसे 450 गीगावाट तक ले जाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। पैनल्स का उद्घाटन करेंगे। The time for talking is over. The world needs to act now.
The 27th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change builds on the outcomes of COP26 to deliver action on an array of issues critical to tackling the climate emergency, from urgently reducing greenhouse gas emissions, building resilience and adapting to the inevitable impacts of climate change, to delivering on the communities and commitments to finance climate action in developing countries. The UN Climate Summit this year was held in the shadow of the Russian aggression in Ukraine and the related energy crisis that has strained the capabilities of countries to urgently tackle climate change. The United Nations Climate Change Summit opened in Egypt with the inclusion of loss and damage finance in the official agenda, and India hoped that fair negotiations on it would follow. A golden opportunity for all stakeholders to rise to the occasion and tackle effectively the global challenge of climate change facilitated by Egypt on the African continent. Egypt assumed the presidency of COP27 with a clear recognition of the gravity of global climate challenge and appreciation of the value of multilateral, collective and concerted action as the only means to address this truly global threat. In light of the 2022 UN Climate Change Conference, students and teachers from across the world got together at a global online discussion to share ideas, solutions and innovative projects for climate action. In an interactive session, youth leaders and innovators presented their ideas and recommendations.
My priority for Thursday, 17th of November, will be to bring the work together and resolve outstanding issues, leaving time for document preparation. Our common objective is to adopt consensus decisions and conclusions.
After days of intense negotiations that stretched into early Sunday morning, countries at the latest UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, reached agreement on an outcome that established a funding mechanism to compensate vulnerable nations for loss and damage from climate-induced disasters. After missing their Friday night deadline, negotiators were finally able to reach conclusions on the most difficult items of the agenda, including a loss and damage facility, with a commitment to set up a financial support structure for the most vulnerable by the next COP in 2023, as well as the post-2025 financial goal and the so-called mitigation work program that would reduce emissions faster, catalyze impactful action, and secure assurances from key countries that they will take immediate action to raise ambition and keep us on the path towards 1.5 degrees Celsius. Yet while agreement on these issues was seen as a welcome step in the right direction, there appeared to be little forward movement on other key issues, particularly on the phasing out of fossil fuels and tightened language on the need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Developing countries made strong and repeated appeals for the establishment of a loss and damage fund to compensate the countries that are the most vulnerable to climate disasters, yet who have contributed little to the climate crisis. The Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Bhupendra Yadav, delivered India's national statement at COP27. At the heart of India's vision of a safe planet is one word mantra: lifestyle for environment, that Prime Minister Modi set forth in our national statement at COP26. The world urgently needs a paradigm shift from mindless and destructive consumption to mindful and deliberate utilization. As the world's most populous democracy and a vibrant emerging economy, India seeks to lead by example and invites the global community to be a part of mission life for individual, family, and community-based actions.
Our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, announced India's aim of achieving net zero emission by 2070 at Glasgow. Within 1 year, India has submitted its long-term low emissions growth strategy indicating low carbon transition pathways in key economic sectors, responding to the call for increased ambition in our 2030 climate targets. India updated its NDC in August 2022. We have embarked our far-reaching new initiatives in renewable energy, e-mobility, ethanol-blended fuels, and green hydrogen as an alternate energy sources. We also seek to foster strong international cooperation through action and solution-oriented coalitions like International Solar Alliance and Coalition of Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, both of which are launched and nurtured by India.
Responding to the call for increased ambition in our 2030 climate targets, India updated its nationally determined contributions in August 2022. We have embarked on far-reaching new initiatives in renewable energy, e-mobility, ethanol-blended fuels, and green hydrogen as an alternate energy source. We also seek to foster strong international cooperations through action and solutions-oriented coalitions like the International Solar Alliance and Coalition of Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, both of which were launched and nurtured by India. Russia's war on Ukraine threatens food and energy supply chains globally. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to claim lives and disrupt everyday life. The gap between the poor and the wealthy is large and growing. And nature is under siege, with the world losing more than 11 million hectares of tropical forest in 2021 alone. Decision makers must stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable populations and put the world on track for a more prosperous future. And while it is possible for individuals to reduce their carbon footprint, action needs to happen on a global scale. Policy makers, governments and organizations must act to tackle climate change. COP27 presented a chance to world leaders to assess the current landscape, reflect on whether previous pledges have been met, and introduce new and decisive actions to reduce emissions and control climate change.
And one thing is certain, those that give up are sure to lose. So let's fight together and let's win. A pact in which all countries make an extra effort to reduce emissions this decade in line with 1.5-degree goal. A pact in which wealthier countries and international financial institutions provide financial and technical assistance to help emerging economies speed their own renewable energy transition. Must take the lead, but emerging economies are... The deadly impacts of climate change are here and now. Loss and damage can no longer be swept under the rug. It is a moral imperative. It is a fundamental question of international solidarity and climate justice.
Well, the clear and present danger of climate change means we cannot burn our way to prosperity. The eyes of all future generations are upon us. With that thought, allow me to sign off. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sansad TV.